Today, almost every country is in debt. The United States debt has surpassed $38 trillion, the highest debt figure in history. The European Union's debt is close to $14 trillion. Japan's debt is nearly $9 trillion. Even oil-rich Saudi Arabia and export giants like Germany and China all have massive debts. You might be thinking, if everyone is in debt, then who are they indebted to? And that's the strange part. The world is actually in debt to itself. It sounds bizarre, but that's how the system works. One country borrows money and gives that money to other countries, banks, and funds. Those, in turn, invest in other countries. So in a strange way, everyone is both a debtor and a creditor. One side earns, while the other pays from its debt. And this cycle keeps spinning endlessly. It all started centuries ago in England. In 1694, England was at war with France and had run out of gold. The king borrowed money from wealthy merchants. According to this agreement, in exchange those merchants would receive annual interest payments, guaranteed by future taxes. To manage this arrangement, the Bank of England was created. Thus modern public debt was born. From that point onward, governments began to use money they didn't yet have. In return, wealthy merchants received promissory notes from the state. These notes later became tradable. Debt, in other words, turned into a commodity. Then every nation adopted this system: France, the Netherlands, America. Soon a country's ability to borrow became a measure of its strength. Once, empires conquered lands for gold. Now they issue bonds for interest. Today, debt has become the fuel of the modern world. The US is in debt, Japan is in debt, Europe is in debt. And every 100 days, the world adds another $1 trillion of debt. But these debts aren't limited to countries. We're all part of the system. We pay taxes, we contribute to pension funds, we pay interest on the money we borrow from banks. So we too are both lenders and borrowers in this great machine. For example, nearly half of the U.S.'s $38 trillion debt is owed to its own citizens. Banks, insurance companies, pension fund, even the U.S. Federal Reserve itself, are the wealthy merchants of this debt. The rest belongs to other countries. The largest foreign holder is Japan, followed by China. So, in reality, most of America's debt is debt to itself. When the government needs money, it issues bonds. Banks buy those bonds, effectively lending money to the state. The central bank can then buy those bonds back when needed, injecting new money into the system. In essence, money circulates between the government and the banks, keeping the system alive. Citizens pay taxes, those taxes cover the interest payments, and the interest flows back to citizens through banks and pension funds. It's a self-sustaining money loop. Central banks are the core link in this chain. What we call printing money is actually creating debt. When the FED, the U.S. Central Bank, or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, they're effectively injecting new money into the economy. So every single dollar represents a debt. In short, there's no such thing as money without debt. Every currency is backed by a promise, a claim of future value. And the system depends on one thing: trust. As long as investors trust that governments will keep paying interest, the system continues to function. But once that trust disappears, the chain breaks. We've seen this before in history. In 2010, Greece couldn't pay its debt. Investors panicked. Interest rates skyrocketed. The European Central Bank and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, stepped in. But the outcome wasn't good. Taxes went up, wages fell, unemployment soared. The so-called bailout was, in reality, a sacrifice carried by the people. A whole generation gave up its prosperity to keep the country alive. Argentina has defaulted multiple times throughout history. Sri Lanka came to a complete halt when it couldn't pay its foreign debts. And then what happened? In time, the same system restarted. New debts replaced old ones. The slate was wiped clean, but the debt remained. In the past, debt was something you borrowed and then repaid. That's no longer the case. Governments no longer plan to repay their debts. In fact, the plan is the exact opposite. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's how the system is designed to work. New bonds are issued to pay off old ones, interest is paid, and the cycle continues. That's why the U.S. will never feel the need to pay off its $38 trillion debt entirely. Japan's debt has reached 2.5 times the size of its annual economic output. Yet no one panics, because everyone knows that's how the system operates. These debts are meant to be renewed indefinitely. For banks and funds, bonds are a safe investment. They don't see them as debts, but as valuable assets. Because the most reliable borrower in any country is the government itself. If governments were to pay off all their debts, the global economy would collapse. Because those debts are the foundation of trust on which money stands, if the debts disappeared, the heart of the system would stop beating. That's why debt is, in fact, the steady heartbeat of capitalism. The goal isn't to eliminate debt, but to keep it sustainable. So how does this affect us? Interest payments aren't distributed evenly. The lower classes pay taxes, while interest income flows to the wealthiest. Because the interest on government bonds is largely paid with collected tax money. So the system doesn't just transfer debt between countries, it transfers wealth between social classes. That's why income inequality and debt levels usually rise together. Those who hold the debt gain, those who owe it lose. In today's financial system, debt has practically become money itself. Governments issue it, banks multiply it, investors trade it. And we, through our salaries, loans, and taxes, are not just part of the chain, we are its core link. Once debt meant dependence. Today it's more accurate to call it balance. But if that balance ever breaks, if trust disappears, we'll see that everything was nothing more than a promise. So, in short, the true purpose of the debt system is not to be repaid, but to be sustained. As long as the world exists, this cycle will continue, and the real question is who gains from this cycle and who loses.